before we do, I'll just go over some housekeeping matters again. As with yesterday, there's no fire alarm test planned, so if the fire alarm does sound, we'll have to leave the building, and if we go out through the doors to my left and then out to the car park. The toilets are down through the doors to my left, down the corridor, and follow the signs to the right. This in-person session is broadcast live. By taking part, you're consenting to being filmed and to the recording and storage of those images in sound recordings, and for any information contained in them for webcasting and training purposes, and for the purposes of keeping historical records and making those records available for the public. Should you wish, further details on our privacy policy are available on our website. Now, before we begin, can I just ask, are there any procedural matters that any parties wish to raise before we begin?
Ma'am, did you get the conditions?
Can I just check, Helen Council, did you get the copy?
Yes. Yes, we did.
And can I just check, did you circulate those to Mr Smart and Mr Kelly as well? And did you both receive those copies?
Yes, ma'am, I have a copy, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now reconvene with Mr Daly, the Council's witness, and we'll start with Glenurquhart Community Council, if you have any clarification questions for that witness.
Not at present, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr Kelly?
No questions of clarification, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you. Okay then, Mr Trinnick, if you could begin.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, Mr Daly. I'm going to start. You have received a list of documents I might refer to, appallingly long, and they won't all be referred to, but we'll use some of them. My first point is really, it's called methodology, but it's really a point of clarification, try and understand something in my own mind. If you go to your inquiry report, at paragraph 4.6, electronic page 17, you tell us there that while you generally adopt the applicant's methodology, you find it useful to include intermediate categories, e.g. low, medium. This means my assessments and those of the applicant are not directly comparable. For example, my assessment of a low, medium magnitude may fall within the applicant's low or medium range without necessarily implying a higher or lower level of effect, and therefore regard should be held to the respective descriptions of the assessments. That might possibly have been concerned to reporters who want to be able to compare like with like, but I suggest for the most part, and certainly for the disputed viewpoints 13, 15, 16 and 18, your views and those of Mr Walker are directly comparable. You both find the same levels of sensitivity. Actually, if you go to document 1172, the comparison table, we can see from a glance, not taking you through each one in detail, that for VP 13, 15, 16 and 18, you subdivide 16 in terms of walkers and road users, but apart from that, you find the same sensitivity as Mr Walker at all viewpoints. You find the same level of magnitude. That's so, isn't it?
That is so. I think just to clarify, because Mr Walker has used a 3-point scale, and I have used effectively a 5-point scale, I suppose. So, for example, Mr Walker's assessment of a low could, in theory, be a little bit higher than my assessment of a low, because it covers a wider range of effects, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I do. I do see what you mean, but actually, looking at some of the other your findings, for example, for viewpoint 5, you actually use the intermediate category of low medium, so you are explicit there in using the intermediate category. Whereas for the disputed viewpoints, you use precisely the same terminology as Mr Walker. That's so, isn't it?
Yes, we both assessed it as low.
And the only difference between you is that you find that significant and he doesn't, and that ultimately is a matter of professional judgment into which I can't dig. But it makes me wonder if that difference in professional judgment is due to some particular factor which we can isolate so that the reporters can see why the difference arises, apart from the mere fact of professional judgment. So if we go to, say, I'll only go to one viewpoint, viewpoint 13, which is at paragraph 6.6 of your inquiry report, at electronic page 27, a much visited viewpoint in this inquiry. And we look at not simply the summary table, but the words you use. In paragraph 6.7, we can see that you agree with the value is high and that the sensitivity is high. No disagreement that I can see there, even in the way you describe matters. And for magnitude, I've read what you said carefully. You agree with the applicant's assessment of low, albeit you were unclear about the geographical extent point, which we explored yesterday. But I'm not sure that's relevant, unless you tell me so, to the difference which then emerges in the finding of significance. Is it? Is that the point?
Well, I described in my methodology that for a viewpoint assessment at a specific point, I don't think that geographical extent is a relevant contributing factor, whereas Mr. Walker's assessment includes geographical extent, assessing it as small. So I'm not quite sure if that has influenced his assessment.
I suspect I'm not going to get much further. I think we're down to the matter of professional judgment. I was just trying to isolate whether there's some X factor that he uses, you don't use, or vice versa, which leads you to find significance and leads Mr. Walker to find not significant. But I suspect we're not, unless you can shine a light on it, I'm not going to get much further.
I'll just add, no, I don't think there's a magic X factor. I think the important thing in determining and describing whether effects are significant or not is the verbal reasoning, if you like, and our assessments of sensitivity and magnitude of change help inform those judgments. But I think there's guidance, the notes and clarifications to GLBIA 3, which I refer to in my inquiry report, which mentions that the use of the term significant should convey issues that are material and should be brought to the attention of the decision maker. So I think that applies to the effects at this particular viewpoint. And I don't have the reference, I'm sorry for the notes and clarifications.
I'll take it one point further. Yesterday afternoon in Chief, I wrote down your words with regard to viewpoint 13. Yesterday afternoon, I wrote down your words in chief with regard to viewpoint 13 that Loch Liath will be, quotes, much more visible than the other developments that can be seen from the viewpoint. And I thought, well, yes, but you still find low magnitude. And I tried to reconcile what you said about much more visible in terms of low magnitude by going to, and I'm going to lose the number of the document, I think it's 1.137, which is Appendix 6.1, the LVIA methodology. Someone tell me if I got the wrong number. I think it's the right one. Yeah.
I could just have a minute.
When you get there, it's internal page A615.
I'm there.
Thank you. Looking at table A616, magnitude of visual effects, we have the factors that, well, size and scale, which is the main factor, and then other, whether you call them modifiers or factors or whatever, we can ignore, I think, reversibility and duration, but you've got geographical extent showing there. But under size and scale, we see the descriptor for a lower magnitude, noting that low is the lowest on the 3-point scale which Mr. Walker uses. And we can read for ourselves, I'm not going to read it out, what it says under lower in that table. And I tried to reconcile, and I want you to tell me how to reconcile your words much more visible related to your finding of significance with your adoption of Mr. Walker's methodology, which you do in paragraph 4.9, and therefore adopting that descriptor of a lower magnitude of effect. It seems to me there is some reconciliation which is needed there.
I'm not sure there is, because my comments yesterday were making comparison between the visibility of the baseline wind farms and the visibility of the proposed development. And I think it's a fair description to say that the proposals would be much more visible than the baseline. That statement wasn't an assessment of magnitude of effect. It was a comparative description.
Taking that point as far as I can, we're going to go on to design the supplementary guidance and mitigation generally. If you go to your inquiry report at paragraph 3.2, it's an electronic page 12, and also get out document 8.4, which is the Nature Scott Siting and Design Guidance. Actually, hold that a moment. Let's see if we can short circuit this point by a series of references, and we may be able to, I think, because that is a document that was explored yesterday. In 8.4, paragraph 214, electronic page 9, that's for reference only at the moment, Nature Scott indicate that the largest turbines they consider in the study are 140 metres to blade tip, although to be fair, they say that in paragraphs 211 and 213 that there may well be turbines of 150 metres or more, unspecified maximum or more. And you agree with Mr. Walker, or Mr. Walker agrees with you rather, that the principles set out in the Nature Scott guidance are perfectly sound. What might divide you, so I'll ask you the question, is whether you would agree with Mr. Walker that the application of the principles requires a degree of caution because of the huge increase in turbine heights since 2017. We are now seeing turbines coming forward at over 200 metres to tip, in this case 180 and 200. What would you say?
I think the principles of the guidance remain applicable. I don't see why the issues that the guidance raises and the issues of siting and designing and placing wind turbines in the landscape are broadly similar. If you're talking about 150 metre turbines or 200 metre turbines, in my opinion.
I'll take you to one point in the document in that case. It's 8.4, paragraph 326, electronic page 19. You'll be very familiar with this advice. It's that on skylines and goes from 326 to 328. Read it for yourself. report has just scanned through at a moment. My point is, following up from what I previously put to you, that nothing wrong with the principles, they're fine, but the practicality of applying some of that advice to turbines 70 metres or more higher than those being considered as a maximum in 2017 requires, I would suggest, a degree of practicality and caution. It's very hard to follow that advice in full for turbines of the size now being considered.
Well, I accept that larger turbines make it more challenging to follow the guidance. But I don't think that means that the issues that the guidance raises are no longer relevant. It's a practical, and I appreciate a difficult challenge of wind farm design to accommodate the guidelines, but it doesn't. That practical matter doesn't negate the importance of the guidelines, in my opinion.
I think actually we're at one on that point. Nothing wrong with the principles, but you recognise that accommodating, I'm rehearsing your answer to make sure I've got it right, not to rehearse it for the note, to see, you can say if I'm accurate or not, but that for very large turbines it becomes quite challenging to fulfil the terms of the advice.
I don't disagree with that statement. No.
Having gone to the guidance, maybe actually it doesn't need much attention in this case. The reason I say that is that if we go to your inquiry report, paragraph 318 on electronic page 14, which has already been gone to in the inquiry by Mr. Walker, you say the turbines of the proposed development are located centrally within this plateau, arranged in a clustered layout, elongated on north to south axis. The level of the turbines is relatively even overall. The layout of the wind farm seems appropriate for its immediate landscape. I know the word immediate landscape setting, and the turbines do not appear out of scale of the landscape in which they were situated. You go on, obviously, to consider Loch Liath in the context of operational and consented developments, and we get on to the topic of undoing mitigation, which you explore later in your inquiry report. Abstract that argument about undoing mitigation, if that argument were not there in this case. It would seem to me that there's no evidence from you that appropriate mitigation by design has not been applied to Loch Liath. Am I correct?
Well, I accept that mitigation has been applied, but I think it depends how you measure mitigation and how you determine whether your mitigation has been successful. I don't think it should be measured just in terms of the number of turbines that have been removed from, for example, a scoping layout, quantum of turbines, but it's really, its success should be judged against its residual effects to sensitive landscape or visual receptors.
That's fair. And nor would I say, look, it's gone down from 150,000 turbines when they first thought of it to 14 now. That's not a real measure at all, nor is it a measure to take from scoping to where we are now. I agree with that. But would you agree that there is good evidence before this inquiry that the applicant has gone some distance to appropriately mitigate by design? The evidence is there in terms of the later iterations into which LUC clearly had an input, the movement of turbines, the reduction in number to those we have now. I'm not saying that makes it perfect, but I am saying, as I would suggest, there has been appropriate mitigation by design.
I think my position is that there has been mitigation applied, and clearly thought has gone into the design of the wind farm. But I've set out in my inquiry report how I don't think the design or the mitigation measures have gone far enough to sufficiently reduce effects to very sensitive landscapes at Loch Ness and in Glen Affric, the lower parts. And as I set out in my inquiry report, I wonder if enough attention has been paid to effects, particularly from Loch Ness, given that there were no, we had this discussion about key design viewpoints yesterday, but there are no viewpoints within Loch Ness, on the waters of Loch Ness, until we see Mr. Walker's inquiry report.
Okay, thank you. And turn to the supplementary guidance. So you might get out, I think, document 6.5. Now, at paragraph 3.6 of your inquiry report on electronic page 12, you usefully summarise paragraph 534 of this document, 6.5, in terms of key findings with regard to development of Loch Ness. Would you turn, please, to electronic page 40? I hope I haven't made a mistake. I think I've got the right page. It's the map. Oh, good, we got the right one. And we are within LN10. First of all, I think, just for the reporter's note, this LN10 area approximates to the area of LCT 222, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And can we agree that, as Mr. Walker said yesterday, that Loch Liath is not near the boundary of LN10 with the more sensitive LN19? It's, putting it colloquially, bang in the middle of LN10.
Yes.
And the advice on wind farm development in LN10 is, as you say, in paragraph 3.6. But let's take that a bit further. Look at electronic page 37 of the document.
I'm working off a hard copy.
No, don't worry. Page that. If I've got the right page, which I haven't necessarily at all, it's, I have got it wrong, it's, I'll find it. It's actual page 35, so it is electronic page 37. Yeah, 6.5. Now, the reason for going to this page, which has small, medium and infrastructure boxes, is at the very top, where it records the scale of sensitivity being used of 1 to 4, 1 being the most susceptible to change. You see that? I'm sorry. It's internal page 35. it helps, it's immediate. You got it? Lovely, thanks. You see the scale of 1 to 4 for sensitivity at the top there. Just for the reporter's note, that's a source for where I'm now going, which is to electronic page 58. Or probably 57. Where we can see that for LN10, the area we're in, the degree of landscape sensitivity in the box for landscape sensitivity is 3. So that's what's been assessed for this area. And I think I'm right in saying, do check if you wish, but that no area within this document has a sensitivity of 4, the lowest, and that only this area has a sensitivity of 3. There are others with a sensitivity of 2 to 3, but not 3. So this is the lowest sensitivity area for large-scale wind farms within the Loch Ness study area. Is that correct?
I haven't checked the numbers, but I think you're probably correct.
Well, Mr. Finn, you can check and re-examine if I'm wrong, but we'll leave it there for the moment.
Sorry, Mr. Can I just check that page reference?
Yes, ma'am. It's electronic page 58, where we see that LN10 has a sensitivity of 3.
That's fine. I thought you said 57, but yeah, 58 is the correct page.
Did I get it right? Or, sorry, if I got...
Yes, no, 58 is correct. You said 57, but 57 is for a different
Sorry,
LN, but it's
my
fine.
apologies.
58 is the correct page.
Yeah. Yes, it's 58. I've already noted, obviously, that Highland Council takes issue with Loch Liath in terms of undoing mitigation secured for previous development, and I'll turn to that briefly now. If you go to your inquiry report at paragraph 312, which is on electronic page 13, and I also record for your notes, ma'am, that the point is repeated at precognition paragraphs 3.2 and 3.3, but I don't need to go there. At 3.12 in your inquiry report, you tell us about the mitigation achieved for Blairy, i.e. the built wind farm. I won't read through it, we're familiar with the text. And if we go to document 1112, which is the Appendix 1 to the further written submission on neighbouring development mitigation measures submitted by Highland Council, and we go to, it's Appendix 1 to that document, it's got a different number, 1112, landscape format. We can see that turbines 33, 34, 35, 36 were limited, were removed to limit the spill of turbines over the natural buffer of Carntazon, and that would reduce visual impact from Muir-Feverney. Let's just test that out. If you go to viewpoint 2, so it's document 282 in the, CD 82. To figure 615G. Here, this is a wire line, 90-degree wire line, nearest turbine 7.11 kilometres, view from the top of Muir-Feverney, and we see Loch Liath, obviously red. But we also see the Blairy extension, don't we? So I've got the wrong figure because that's the section 36 variation. Bear with me a moment. Yep, sorry, it's figure 615C. From which we can see Loch Liath, but we also see the consented Blairy extension. Now, I cannot tell from this image, I acknowledge, which are where the 4 deleted turbines of Blairy extension were. But the picture, I think, is plain enough that having secured the mitigation from the point of view of Emile Fervenet for Blairy extension, which comes far further forward towards Emile Fervenet, further forward than Loch Liath, has now been consented. Highland Council resolved this. It's undone its own mitigation, has it not, Mr. Walker, Mr. Daly?
At this particular viewpoint, we're talking about the extension, Blairy extension, undoing the mitigation of Blairy. I would agree now that the turbines do come over. Apologies for my pronunciation, Tarsyun, but that is only one aspect of the secured mitigations around Loch Ness. So we have the mitigations within Loch Ness, which have clearly set out by the Council to be of the key concern. It doesn't undo any of that mitigation, particularly as experienced in loch level views, and it doesn't undo any of the mitigation that's been achieved within Glen Affric from low level views. So I agree, it undoes some of the mitigation to a degree from a viewpoint where your views are principally along the Great Glen, I think is the natural direction of view, rather than towards the wind farm development.
I'm focusing on Emile Fervenet, and that's why I took you here. I understand your evidence in relation to Loch Ness, and we will come to that when we come to Loch Ness, and to Glen Affric when we come to talk about the NSA. That's fine. But I think it's fair to say that one of the key objectives of the Loch Ness strategic study that we've been to was to avoid perceptions of Emile Fervenet being encircled, and turbines should minimise visual confusion from higher ground to the west and north and from Emile Fervenet. And it seems to be tolerably clear that, having preached undoing mitigation to us, it's extremely clear that Highland Council, from the perspective of Emile Fervenet, has undone it itself.
Well, I think with respect to the two aspects, well, particularly one aspect, the encirclement aspect, I don't think that the Blairy extension gives an impression of encirclement from Emile Fervenet. I think Loch Liath gives much more of an impression of that, because it extends, the horizontal extent of wind farms quite considerably from that viewpoint. Now, I'm not suggesting that viewpoint to Emile Fervenet is now encircled, but it goes some way to having that effect.
I think you've agreed that, certainly from the perspective of those Blairy extension turbines marching towards Emile Fervenet a lot further than Blairy, you'll agree the point, so we'll leave it there. If you go, and I'm not looking at CD11 now, I'm not looking at the Highland Council point about undoing mitigation, I'm looking at our perspective on that. If you go to Mr. Walker's inquiry report at 553 on electronic page 35, He refers here to Cloyk Wind Farm. Apologies, I'm going to first.
It's
553, yes. Internal page 35, electronic page, whatever it is. Thanks. Here, Mr. Ward is addressing Cloyk, which extends the operational Strone-Leg wind farm. Just to help the reporters, if you go to the A1 map, we go to the southeast quadrant of that map at a distance of, I can't see where it is now, it's 25 kilometres. The reporters can note the blue turbines of Strone-Leg, and to the west of that, the consented turbines of Cloyk. That's correct, isn't it? In 554, you see what Mr. Walker says, that when the Council considered Cloyk, it was noted in the inquiry report that the design of Strone-Leg has already been eroded to some degree to the north by the consent of the yet-to-be-built-out Dell, which is much more visible in the elevated southern view overlooking the Great Glen. Council goes on to state that the eastern cluster turbines increase the horizontal spread, stepping out of the valley, appear of a larger scale, undoing some of the inherent design mitigation of the Strone-Leg turbines. Point 1. Overall wind farm increases degree of circlement of this viewpoint, Meal-Fervenay. Point 2. And yet it was recommended no objection. You knew that, did you?
I was aware of that.
Some inconsistency here, surely, Editor.
Well, there are some aspects of 5.4, the Council's, I appreciate this is the Council's view, but I don't really think that Cloyk strongly creates a sense of encirclement from Meal-Fervenay when you consider the distance of Cloyk Wind Farm from Meal-Fervenay. I think it broadly complies with the Council's strategy of clustering of wind farm developments in the uplands around Loch Ness so that they don't have an effect on Loch Ness. The cluster is slightly bigger, but the Strone-Leg and the Cloyk cluster are clearly separate from the Corrigarth cluster, which is several kilometres to the north. So, in my view, the overall pattern of wind energy development is broadly maintained.
Okay. I thought you might say that. I'm really putting to you what Highland Council's officers have said about Cloyk, acknowledging with undue mitigation, acknowledging that in their view it would increase encirclement of Meal-Fervenay, and yet, in comparison with Loch Liath, no problem, recommend no objection. But there we are. One more point on this, although it's... Fair enough. Go to CD 288, please, which is viewpoint 8. .554. Yeah. If we go to document 288, which is viewpoint 8, it's on the same theme, but it's not related to the Highland Council's evidence in this case on undoing mitigation. We go to figure 621G and H. And this is the viewpoint which defeated our efforts to get to the inquiry by that route. You're aware, obviously, it's a very well visited viewpoint. Coaches pull in at the lay-by, etc., etc. And purely in terms of the attitude being taken to Loch Liath in comparison with the Blairy extension, for that well-visited viewpoint, that Blairy extension brings development far further forward, doesn't it? And I suggest it undoes any of the mitigation that might have been secured for the viewpoint in terms of the Blairy built wind farm.
Well, my understanding of the Council's concerns in respect to mitigation in this area, like where we're looking, it relates to Loch Ness and the effect of particularly loch level views. So from this viewpoint, we can't see Loch Ness as far as I'm aware, or you get a very restricted view. The view is really down Stratherick. So it's certainly not undoing mitigation secured for minimising effects from Loch Ness or within Glenafric or Milfirvenay from this viewpoint. So I disagree that this is undoing any important mitigation.
All right. Let's turn to look at supplementary guidance criteria. You deal with them in starting at paragraph 325 of your inquiry report, but actually I want to go to your appendix 2 because there you deal with all the criteria in more detail. And I'll just go to the ones which are between us, which we can helpfully see. You've highlighted your views in bold, where you take a view that we are not meeting the measure of the criteria. I'll deal with Loch Ness views later. I'm dealing here with Milfirvenay. You say the proposed development would have a detrimental impact on views from that hill, being the most prominent development visible and significantly extending the part of the view affected by the turbines. Well, we've just been to the viewpoint from the top of Milfirvenay and we've observed what Blairy extension does. Acknowledging that Loch Liath extends the view horizontally, we don't dispute that. In terms of being the most prominent development visible, I would say no, that's Blairy extension quite clearly. What do you say?
I'd say they're both relatively prominent, but I think there's a fair case to be made that that Loch Liath is more prominent than Blairy extension, bearing in mind that the turbines are somewhat bigger. You're seeing it in a separate part of the landscape.
I shall find that quite surprising assertion if you look at that viewpoint again, which we will actually now. It's figure 6 within CD 282, figure 615C. You are saying you find Loch Liath more prominent than Blairy extension from this viewpoint?
I agree. There's not a great deal in it. I think there are things like the Loch Liath turbines. If I look at the visualization, they're sitting above the hubs or above the horizon. I admit they're further away, but they seem to spread an equal distance, horizontal distance compared to Blairy extension. I mean, it's certainly a prominent wind farm development. I don't think there's any dispute about that.
Very well. No, I've got your point on that. Looking further ahead, of course, and I fully acknowledge that you don't look at the scenario 2 cumulative situation, you base your evidence, I think, on scenario 1, so consented, as opposed to developments sort of further out there in the future. But you'll be aware of the Blairy Section 36 scoping proposal. And if we go, while we're in 282, conveniently, to figures 615K and L, and to save re-examination, I have no idea what attitude Highland Council will take to this development if and when it is submitted. Put that on the record. We can see now that that Section 36 variation proposal in 615K is again more prominent at 220 metre high turbines, 230 metre turbines at scoping than Blairy extension, can't we? So that goes ahead. If Highland Council say yes to that extension, the position would alter considerably, wouldn't it?
Well, I have to say that's a very speculative
It is.
position. We have no idea what Highland Council's position will be. We don't know if that's even the form of the wind farm that will be submitted. I don't feel I can comment on that.
Which is fair enough. Turning to criterion 3, and the criterion is that valued natural and cultural landmarks should be respected. The measure is the extent to which the proposal affects the fabric and setting of those landmarks, and the requirement is the development should not diminish their prominence. And you say development would have a significant effect on views experienced on the approach to Urquhart Castle. I'll deal with that later. And from some views to Meal Fervenay, from the ridge to the east of Loch Ness. If we go to CD 3.5 here, which is the landscape officer's report on the Loch Liath application, 3.5, internal page 2. Under the second bullet point, Meal Fervenay, second paragraph, she says, well, the development would not significantly affect views towards Meal Fervenay. So obviously you take a slightly different opinion. I would guess that's because you alighted upon the Fair Lads Pass viewpoint. Is that fair?
Well, I'm not sure I'd say alighted upon as if by accident.
Came across it, whatever.
I identified it as the relevant viewpoint.
That's fine. And that's what led you to your view. Perhaps that's the factor that led to your view contrasting with that of the landscape officer.
I think that's possibly the case.
But if we look then at your HC1, which is the Fair Lads Pass viewpoint, document 12.1, I think it's just off the, what's it, the Caledonian Way, is that's what it's called at that point?
No. The Caledonian Way is along the shoreline. This is off the three trail, is the Trail of the Seven Lochs.
Yes, that's right.
The South Loch Ness Trail and the Loch Ness 360 Trail. So that's 3 recreational routes.
Indeed. I think approaching it's quite a steep climb from memory. If we look at the wireline here, I invite you to observe 2 things. Firstly, that the natural view at this point is the southwest-northeast alignment of the Great Glen and Loch Ness. That is the natural focus of the view. Secondly, I'll put them both to you at once, that while clearly Loch Liath would be seen in the context of Meal Fervenay, which we easily see left of centre of the image, it would not impinge on Meal-Furvenay in the sense of competing with Meal-Furvenay. It'll be seen in the same view, but that's as far as it goes. Would you agree?
I agree that the views are along the loch and to the southwest and equally to the northwest. But Meal-Furvenay is a very noticeable feature from this viewpoint. It's a very prominent landmark, and I accept it doesn't impinge directly upon the hill, but I think it's a distracting element in the view. And from this viewpoint, both me and Mr. Walker agreed that there would be a significant adverse visual effect to this view.
Correct, you do. But I was interested in what Mr. Walker said yesterday, the way he put it, which was that while Loch Liath and indeed Crathaig, from this elevated viewpoint, would be seen in the context of Meal-Furvenay, his view, it wouldn't compete with the profile of the hill. It's simply seen in the context of the hill. Would you agree with that observation?
I think that's a fair observation, but well, I refer to my earlier comment that you're having a significant adverse visual effect in a view that's directed in the same direction as Meal-Furvenay.
If we go to criterion 6, which advises, as guidance to developers, not as a matter of policy obviously, that the existing pattern of wind energy development should be respected, and the measure is carefully set out the degree to which the proposal fits with the existing pattern of nearby wind energy development. Considerations include, so they're not exclusive, but they're listed. And going through them, I'm not going to go through each one boringly, but you've seen them. I would suggest that, leaving out the last one, which I'll come to separately, the only one really between us here is previously instituted mitigation measures.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, yes.
And in terms of the final bullet point, probably one for the policy session rather than for you, but tell me if you have any ideas. What are the stated aims for the development of the area? Presumably they're as set out in LN10.
Yes, the only guidance that I know, or I refer to, is the onshore wind energy supplementary guidance.
Yeah, okay, we're agreed. And finally, on criterion 9, I always find the weird one, I don't know what it means. Landscape setting of nearby wind energy developments is respected, and the measure is the extent to which the landscape setting of those developments is affected by the proposal. And the advice is that the proposal should relate well to the existing landscape setting, not increase the perceived visual prominence of surrounding wind farms. Now, I suspect I know where we are on this, but let's be clear that in landscape character terms, LCT 222 can accommodate Loch Liath. There's no landscape point really between us there.
Yes, it has a character suitable for accommodating that type of development.
So it's the visual side, as set out indeed in that criterion, which divides us. In other words, when you say it's extending an established wind farm cluster, I say at that point, yeah, so what? That's nothing wrong with that of itself. But you're saying, but it notably increases its overall prominence from viewpoints such as Meal-Furvenay, and introduces new significant effects on sensitive locations, Loch Ness and from Glen Affric. That's your gripe in terms of that criterion.
Yes, that's what I set out.
I'm not going to agree about it. I want to be clear what you're saying, that's all. Thank you. We'll change topic now to the NSA. Now would be a convenient moment if you wanted 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can break until 10:40. Thank you.
No one is claiming an effect on the significant adverse effect on the integrity of the NSA. The issue is whether or not there are effects on special qualities, those being SLQ1, SLQ2 and SLQ6. And for the purpose of this examination, and indeed in the EIAR in agreement with Nature Scott, SLQ1 and 8 were grouped, so we can deal with those two together. You addressed the NSA in your inquiry report from paragraph 5.7, electronic page 21, so let's go there. It's from 5.8 to 5.11, you addressed those two SLQs 1 and 8. But your evidence, you recall what Nature Scott say in 5.10. In 5.11, informed by my assessment of significant effects on viewpoint 15 and the wider route described later in this report, I also consider these effects, the effects of these SLQs will be significant. I also take from the assessment, Nature Scott's assessment, that significant effects to an SLQ may arise when only one attribute or aspect of the SLQ is affected. I don't dispute between us there. That is your evidence on SLQ 1 and 8. You really, dare I suggest, rely very heavily on the Nature Scott response and fall in line with it rather than do anything extra yourself. No criticism, but that I think is what you do.
Well, I do attach significant weight to Nature Scott's response, as they are the authority on SLQs and NSAs, and I think really because the effects do relate to visual effects, the proposed development principally, and how they affect your perception of SLQs. My conclusions are informed by my assessment of visual impacts.
I understand. If we go to document 3.2, which unhelpfully are a bundle of consultation responses, but electronic page 39, which is the Nature Scott response, that's where it starts. And if we go through to electronic page 46, which is an internal page, if I've got it right, internal page 9 anyway, that's where I am. That is where Nature Scott, in the second half of the page, assessed these two SLQs 1 and 8. And at the bottom of that page, they start to make their assessment. While there's a low-level development on containing hills, Coromony, this is below the skyline, relatively small scale, visually contained, surrounded by completely undeveloped areas, etc. And then the next paragraph, the proposal as represented by example viewpoint 15 does not fit the landscape character in terms of scale and positioning. You can read on for yourself, but I'm drawing attention to that paragraph as being Nature Scott's assessment of impacts on those two SLQs as grouped. So we can read that for ourselves. The point of going there is to make the suggestion, which I think you've already anticipated to some extent on what you've said, that neither Nature Scott nor you, I acknowledge it's not for you to do a proper SLQ assessment. That's for the LVIA. You may critique it, and that's fine, but not for you to do a brand new assessment. But in your approach and that of Nature Scott, neither of you have done more than make an appraisal of visual effects from selected viewpoints, as opposed to assessing the proposed development against the attributes of the SLQs in the round. It's a very narrow approach to assessment. What do you say to that? You tackle that at paragraph 410 of your precondition, but there you say simply you're relying on HSCOT, so you haven't really answered the point. Perhaps you could now.
Well, SLQs, and they're a combination of landscape effect, of landscape character, and views, and how people experience a landscape. Now, in this particular case, I don't think that the proposed development, and I don't think NatureScot do either, think that the proposals have an effect on the landscape character of the NSA, because they are out with the NSA. They're not part of that landscape. Their effect is principally to views. So the SLQs in question refer specifically to the beauty of the glens and the beautiful Loch Liath, which, in my opinion, is essentially down to how they are experienced visually and how the proposed development would impinge on that experience.
Very well. The word that occurs to me is immersion, by which I mean that if you're going to, and I'll take you in a minute to where I think it is properly done, if you're going to assess matters properly against the attributes of the NSA, you have to immerse yourself in the NSA in order to give context to the viewpoints which you and NatureScot have selected in coming to your conclusions. To let you think about that, would you turn to document 1.139, which is Technical Appendix 6.3 to the EIAR. At, I can only give an internal page, my apologies, A634, 6/3, oh, sorry, yes, this 4, which starts at the top of the page, step 3, the analysis of effects on SLQs. And we'll see there that in the left column, SLQs, not numbered, but there they are. 1 is one of the most beautiful glens in Scotland, and 2 is beautiful Loch Liath under, as agreed with NatureScot, Group 1, scenic qualities and aesthetic value. And we'll see in the third column the assessment carried out by land use consultants of the impact of the development on the SLQ. And I'm not going to read it out, I know you've read it, but for the reporter's note, I suggest that this is the most thorough and proper exploration of the effect of the development, immersing themselves in the topic rather than just going to a viewpoint. And it's what, I'll put it brutally, that I think NatureScot and you have skated over the surface of what is really required to evaluate the impact of the development on these SLQs.
Well, I think when assessing SLQs, and the guidance is fairly clear, is that it's necessary to identify what attributes of an SLQ might be affected and how people might experience that effect. And it's clear from the ZTV prepared in the LVIA that it's completely accepted that the visibility to the proposals, certainly from the lower parts of Glen Affric, are quite limited. So, and are essentially restricted to the core path to the north of Loch Liath. So, I think it's perfectly reasonable to focus on that aspect of people's experience of the SLQ, because that's really the principal location where effects are going to be experienced. We could go into a great deal of detail about locations where there is no effect from the proposed development, but I'm not sure if it's particularly worthwhile. And I go back to my earlier point that it's the importance of where people are when they're experiencing these effects and what they're doing. And from a popular and very well used and recognised route to the north of Loch Liath, I think that you can easily have significant effects to SLQs experienced from a particular location. And I think really the difference lies between myself and Mr. Walker and Nature Scott is the significance of visual effects from that location.
I agree, that's where the difference lies, but can I suggest that, with due respect, because you are the expert, not me, that that approach isn't entirely right. That in order to evaluate the impact of a development on the SLQ on a rounded basis, you don't simply go to where you see the development from and say, well, look, that's an impact, and I think it's an impact on the attribute of the SLQ. You have to go throughout the area to experience the SLQ and then be able to say, well, yes, but how much of that attribute, how much of that SLQ is really impacted? Now, I can see that if there's a, a particular viewpoint which dominates and which is so important that if you impact that, you might impact the whole SLQ. But I don't think is the claim being made here, and I suggest that simply to focus on that limited section of the path to the north of Loch Liath is a very partial assessment.
Well, I disagree, because the guidance on assessing SLQs is very clear that what's important is how people experience an SLQ and from where. And as I've said, and is Nature Scott's approach, and they are the authority, they have determined that there would be significant effects to SLQs experienced from particular locations. And that to me seems a perfectly reasonable approach.
Okay. I won't take you through SLQ6 as well, but man, for your note in that same document 1.139, I would make the same point and I would get the same answer, because it's exactly the same question. It's dealt with, SLQ6 is dealt with on the next page, in fact. Historic and popular route through the Highlands, that is SLQ6. So just for your note.
Am I able to comment on SLQs?
Yes, of course you can. So,
I would just like to comment that Mr. Walker identifies a significant effect to SLQ6. I think that's principally on the basis of a significant visual effect from viewpoint 9 and locations nearby, I think a bit further to the west.
can you take me to that in his stage 3 for SLQ6, because I'm struggling a bit here to find it.
Well, if we refer to, it's actually the 1.139.
Yeah.
And I did incorrectly state that Mr. Walker didn't identify any significant effects to SLQs, whereas in fact he does identify one localized significant effect, and I'm just trying to find it.
I think it's at the bottom of page 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to point out that that appears to be informed by and large, as far as I can tell, a significant adverse visual effect that's identified from viewpoint 9. So I don't think Mr. Walker's approach in terms of identifying where significant effects occur is that different to our approach, because he has...
Well, I'm glad you went there, because in fact if you read on in that paragraph, he puts viewpoint 9 into a broader NSA context, doesn't he? It's not simply a viewpoint assessment. If you read on, the scale of change resulting will reduce with distance, unlikely to significantly affect the overall sequential recreational experience. So he puts that viewpoint in the context of the sequential recreational experience.
Well, that's the same experience that you'd get from near viewpoint 15, because people are sequentially walking along the path near viewpoint 15.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's very different.
Okay. Now, if you go to the, just to help the reporters again, although they've done their site visits, so they know this. If we go to the big map, as they call it, on number 11.2, we can see, can't we, the circular walk around Loch Liath, which contains on the south side quite the length of the waymarked African Tail Trail, or way, which will be unaffected by Loch Liath. We can see the ZT, we'll see from ZTV what will be affected. You see where viewpoint 15 is. Have you walked that circular route yourself?
I've not walked the entire circular route. I've walked sections of the path, either side of, in the location of viewpoint 15. So I've walked along the north side of the path.
How far did you walk along the north side of the path westwards into the glen?
Not far beyond viewpoint 15. It was a roundabout to viewpoint 15.
So your field work, and it's not critical, I'm just trying to find out, you know the car park at the bottom there, where you, between the trees, you leave your car, you walk up that trail, and you get to viewpoint 15, went a little bit beyond it, but that's your experience of this circular route?
That's correct.
Okay. Would you get out, please, well, get to your paragraph 4.9 of your inquiry report. No, it's not 4.9 at all. It's your, stupid boy, your precognition at 4.9. This is where you draw attention to the viewpoint 12 visualisation for Crathaig wind farm from the core path north of Loch Liath, showing clear visibility to Loch Liath. So is that to Crathaig or to Loch Liath, the proposed development site?
It's to Loch Liath.
Loch Liath. Approximately 1.4 kilometres west of viewpoint 15, and you note what we already know about turbine 14. If you go to your document 12.6, and bear me when I find it on my iPad, which is never simple. Yeah, here we are. You can see that Loch Liath, is only really visible in the 65.5 degree image, which is the first page of that document. That's correct, isn't it? Because if you scan down, 65.5, that's right, you go down and then you start to focus in at 50 mil, and below that following Highland Council recommendations to 75 mil, you lose the context of Loch Liath, don't you, in the image?
It's still a feature of the view. It's
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. In the image as presented, you lose that context. My point being that while walking along that path, the true and natural focus of the view will indeed be down to the south towards Loch Liath and across Loch Liath, not in the direction of travel which is necessitated by the need to produce a turbine image.
Well, I think naturally when you're walking along a footpath, you tend to look in the direction that you're moving.
Really?
I do.
I probably look fall over, but if you're actually appreciating your surroundings, you can stop and look around, and my suggestion is that the absolutely natural views from that viewpoint would be south towards the loch and indeed west up towards the mountainous interior, going towards Kintail, rather than in the direction shown.
I'm not suggesting you wouldn't look around, but I really do think that you would be looking directly where the path is leading you for quite a large proportion of the time. Particularly if you're moving, as you say, you wouldn't want to fall over.
Yeah. Scanning down to the Highland Council image at the bottom, the separate point emerges here. Obviously we can see the Coromani turbines there, and we've already discussed those. My suggestion to you is that when comparing those with what is proposed, obviously they're closer, obviously they're smaller, obviously they're backclothed by land, but that's the point. The very backclothing of the land, when the sunlight is upon those turbines, will draw attention to their presence in a way which would not otherwise be at that distance and with that scale of turbine.
I think backclothing, it can increase the prominence of turbines if there is a strong contrast between the background and the turbine colouring in particular lights. But on the other hand, backclothing can reduce the apparent prominence of a turbine because it's sitting within the landscape rather than above it. So there are pros and cons of backclothing, I would say.
There are indeed, but I was looking simply at that image, suggesting that the relative prominence of the Coromani turbines in comparison with those at Loch Liath, it's somewhat confused by that backclothing because those Coromani turbines will be disproportionately prominent in sunlight as compared with those of Loch Liath on the skyline.
Well, that's a kind of a scenario that may or may not happen. I would say the real reason for the disparity in prominence isn't to do with backclothing, it's to do with the scale of the turbines. And I think the viewpoint 15 wireline visualizations for Loch Liath clearly show quite a large disparity of scale between the two developments.
Just amplifying on the point about the broader attributes of SLQs, well, 1, 2 and 8, 1, 2 and 1, 6 and 8 together. You've told us how far you went up that trail beyond viewpoint 15. Mr. Walker, of course, has produced for the inquiry document 11.2. Get the exact number, hold on. It's Series H within that. I think this is going to be confusing because actually the H series
11.2A.
is 11.2A, funnily enough. try and find an electronic page for you. Yep, here we are. Starting at electronic page 39, but I want to start at electronic page 42. Within which you will see image H20. You've got that? And you actually in somewhere first. I'm going to have to take people to where's the location of devices? D. Bear with me, please.
11.2D.
I'm sorry, I have to go somewhere else first. 11.2D. That's for E, not for H. We haven't got that. Forget it. Go back to where you were at H20. Now, this is simply a context image looking east along Glen Affric from the core path, but well beyond viewpoint 15. You understand that? And not be critical, you haven't been there. This is simply an image taken from that point. I'll walk you through the images I want to and then put the points I want to. If you look at then image 25 on the next page, sorry, 2 pages on, here we've got the looking west back across Loch Affric towards Carnaquar Garb, I think I've got that right, and the Kintail Hills beyond, and then looking back into the mountainous exterior, giving context to what you experience. And then finally, if you go to image 20H28, you're back on the path west of viewpoint 15 by about a kilometre and a half, looking towards. Do you notice there, one reason for going to that image, this sort of photograph was taken in October 22, the tree growth in the foreground?
I can see some trees.
Right. And it's all, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I just make the general point that this is, obviously, it's a semi-natural landscape. It's not a plantation forestry where we can expect many metres of tree growth along the path.
No, I would never suggest that, don't worry. I put 2 points to you on these images. Firstly, that when you are further west than you went, and to which where Mr. Walker has been, to the full extent of the circular route, you do obtain a true perspective and appreciation of SLQ1, one of the most beautiful glens in Scotland, and of SLQ8, beautiful Loch Affric, which you could never experience simply by going to viewpoint 15 and a little bit west from there. That's my point.
Well, I'm not disputing that you could walk for miles along the path from where there's little visibility to the proposed development, and you can experience those SLQs. Mm-hmm. I go back to my previous point that what's important is where the proposals are visible from and how people experience these SLQs, and from a core path promoted route, the experience of those SLQs will be significantly affected, and that's the view of nature, Scott.
Yes. Okay, thanks. I'm going to turn to the SLA now. Turning to the SLA, go to your inquiry report at 523, electronic page 23. It's a topic that came up yesterday when Mr. Walker gave evidence. also get our document 823, which is the SLA assessment of Highland SLAs. And within that, go to page 119, electronic page 127. This is probably a point of clarification rather than anything else, but you say in 523 the relevant SQs under the heading of the dramatic Great Glen potentially affected by the proposed development can be grouped and summarised as 1 and 2. To be clear, the SQ is the dramatic Great Glen, isn't it?
Yes, I probably should have said attributes of the Great Glen.
Then we would agree. That's fine. Thank you very much. And you only assert significant effects on one of the three SQs, the dramatic Great Glen.
That's correct.
And if we look through the bullets on page 119, electronic page 127, see what's between us. Probably the first bullet point gives rise to evidence which divides the applicant and Highland Council. Agreed? Not bullet 2. Obviously, Falls and Foyers are some distance away and not relevant here. Agreed?
Agreed.
Bullet 3, I would guess, doesn't give rise to any issues between us.
Agreed.
Bullet 4, I wasn't sure about whether you would light upon that or not. I suspect rather not, but tell me.
I'm pretty sure I refer to distinctive views and vistas, so...
Then fair enough, it's relevant. Bullet 5 says what it says, but I doubt that any evidence arises from that. 6 is between us, Urquhart Castle. 7 is between us because of the B8, get the road number right, 852, I think, in this case. And it says what it says. And bullet 8 is not between us in an SLA context, is it? Mere Furvenay, because you're looking the other way.
Yes, I refer to it in my assessment, but I don't think that significant effects to SQs are experienced from that location.
Thank you. You go to 527 of your inquiry report. You're addressing the dramatic linear landscape of Loch Liath as a general point, and we went here from the HC1 viewpoint to some extent. Can we agree that, indeed, as it says in bullet point 1 on page 119, a very striking profile of the glen is typically best experienced from either end from the water, although good views are also obtained from elevated viewpoints. You had to be able to see along the glen, along the loch, to appreciate that particular attribute as a special quality.
Yes.
Yeah. If you now go to a viewpoint, which is document 294, I think it's 13 probably, but let's take a look. Yeah, viewpoint 13. What I'm addressing here is the appreciation of that attribute of the special quality which you indeed you are addressing in 527. My suggestion is that, threefold perhaps, that indeed from viewpoint 13, the natural long view is down the loch. I suppose that's a fairly obvious point. You agree with that?
I think it's certainly you are looking along the loch from this location, but also slightly across.
Well, we'll come to Urquhart Castle shortly, but and I'll put the point now and then return to it. And when you're at this viewpoint 13, and the reporters would have seen this for themselves, it's actually quite difficult to experience the structure of Urquhart Castle in any lighting conditions, isn't it? You can't see how Strona Point juts out. You can't really determine the castle. The visitor centre is actually more prominent than the castle in visual appreciation from here. Do you agree?
Yes, I did say in my inquiry report that I didn't think that Urquhart Castle is a particularly notable feature in this view.
Okay, so if we can agree that at least a natural view is down the loch, we can then observe that the skyline immediately behind the Great Glen, which, if you like, contains the Great Glen, includes Milfervenay, the hill to the left of it, whatever its name is, and we can see that skyline. But we can observe, can't we, that Loch Liath is behind at least two skylines behind that skyline. Do you agree? At the head of Glen Corty.
It's seen within a set of hills, but the ultimate skyline, it sits above the kind of the highest skyline. If you see, if you know what I mean, its hubs sit above the skyline, or some hubs, and most of the blades do. Looking at the wireline visualization,
but it's not. It's not part of what you experience as the Great Glen, is it? It's way beyond that. The skyline's way beyond the encircling hills of the Great Glen itself.
well, I think that's the difference between effects to landscape character and effects to views. It may be that you associate it with a different landscape to the Great Glen, but in terms of a visual impact, that doesn't really have any difference. It's still what I would consider to be a very noticeable feature in a view of the Great Glen.
See, that's where we depart from each other. For the reporter's note, that you say that, we say that from viewpoint 13, your natural view is very much down the loch. Loch Liath sits very obliquely at some distance, at a distance of 20 kilometres, some distance off to the side, not in the natural frame of the view, and does not have the impact that you say it does. Although you still find low magnitude, but significant.
Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to identify a significant effect from a low magnitude of impact to a high sensitivity receptor. And my assessment is for a moderate adverse effect, which in my methodology I generally find to be significant. So Mr. Walker's assessment tends to combine a low and a high and come up with a minor. So I don't think there's anything particularly unusual about my assessment, and I go back to my previous point that I think somebody visiting this location has purposefully visited this viewpoint to experience views of the loch the proposals are going to be very easily noticeable.
Okay. We're getting into areas where we know each other's case and we will agree to disagree, so I'll leave that there. But in terms of the ZTV, if you turn up map 11.2, the big map again, and let's look at the just what is available from this side of the loch, what the views that are available, sorry, not very well put. I think we agreed yesterday, it's somewhere, you've got HC1, the Fair Lads Pass, not much to the southwest of that, and you've got visibility intermittently because of the trees between HC1 and just north of viewpoint 13, and that's it, isn't it? And on the water itself.
In terms of visibility, yes, that's what the image shows.
Yeah. And trees have a real influence, don't they, in that area? You've got 2 or 3 laybys there in ZTV coverage, but actual views are heavily obscured across the loch by trees. You actually have to walk down to the loch edge to get a clear view. Isn't that right?
Well, yes, you do, but I think the point here is that is one of the few, or there aren't that many locations where you can actually walk down to the loch edge and experience a view of the Great Glen. So that's why there are various parking spots, and people clearly make the effort to go down to the loch.
Mm-hmm. All right. In terms of elevated viewpoints, we've been to Fair Lads Pass already. We may not need to go back there. Let's have a look. No, we don't need to go back there. We saw that. Going on to Urquhart Castle. I should say, ma'am, I'm probably 10 or 15 minutes out from finish. Go to your inquiry report at paragraph 532. And also still have out document 823, page 119, electronic page 127. Sorry, document 823, page 119, electronic page 127. It's the SLA assessment. In the bullet point which deals with Urquhart Castle, it's a prominent focus along the loch, occupying a magnificent situation on an irregular headland of rock, Strona Point, jutting out into the loch and commanding splendid views up and down the Great Glen, and it then refers to the British Aluminium Factory. You heard, I've partly explored this already, so I'm going to be brief. You've heard Mr. Walker say in chief that you really can't appreciate the castle as a structure from the east side of the loch at a location where there would also be views of Loch Liath. You've got to be in a boat directly opposite the castle, so you've got to be on a boat. And he explained how boats approached within about 500 metres of the castle on a 1-hour trip coming down from Drumnadrochit or somewhere else, take their photographs, and then either go away or deliver visitors to the landing point and they go around the castle. Are we in disagreement about that general appreciation?
Well, I've been on the boat. I disagree that you look at or appreciate the castle just when you're very close to the castle, I suppose is my disagreement.
Sorry, I don't quite get the disagreement.
Well, the implication in that, in what you said, was that you just appreciate the castle from when you're very close to the castle, when the boat kind of circles around it. When I was on the boat, I was looking for the castle. Well, that's perhaps because that's what I was interested in, but many people on that boat are going specifically to the castle because that's what the boat does.
Follow a bit further and go to your HC2 and 3 images. Taken from not too far apart. Appreciate these are fairly dark images, nature of the day or whatever, or it may be the reproduction that I have as a photocopy, I don't know. But these photographs do confirm the visually recessive nature of the castle, don't they? Even from the water. Pretty difficult to make out the castle, although it may be the photographic quality and that the human eye will pick it out rather better.
I think that's probably down to the weather on the day that I was on the boat. It wasn't the best of days, but I can imagine in sunnier weather that you would have a much clearer view of the castle.
Well, even going to the last image of HC2 using Highland Council standards, and therefore what the human eye perhaps wouldn't see, but for 75mm focal length, still not picking up that castle, are you?
Well, I think from the...
Oh, is it off the image?
It's off the image, so
That's why I'm not picking it up.
Well, it's
right.
in the... Yeah. So it's quite clearly, well, I say clearly, but it's present in the 50mm image.
All right. Well, still got difficulty, but I know where it is, therefore I see it.
Yeah.
If I didn't know where it was, I think I'd have some difficulty.
Well, I think that's perhaps a function of the image and the conditions that...
I accept that, of course I do. But I'll leave it to the site visit rather than argue that point. I would suggest again that, as well as looking at Urquhart Castle, people on the Jacobite cruise boats coming out of Drummond Rocket, they're going to be also focusing on that dramatic linear landscape of Loch Ness. That they won't think of it as such, but that's what they're focusing on, the Great Glen. And the natural view is going to be down the Great Glen. Oh, there's Urquhart Castle, here we are. But the natural view is very much down the Glen, is it not?
I think people will be doing both. I think they'll be looking down the Great Glen, but they will be looking towards the castle. I think when you leave the castle site, you're looking back at the castle, because in fact on the boats it's probably easier to see when you're on the top deck looking backwards. Mm-hmm. So I think people will be looking in a variety of locations, but I think views to the castle would be one of those locations, given that that's where people have just been and why they went on that cruise in the first place.
Okay. Just one final point, because we'll be going around in circles if I go on about this point anymore. I noticed that for the HC1, you have a 65.5 degree image, which shows the full context of the view. Would it not have been sensible to produce for HC2 and 3 the same 65.5 degree image? Because that gives far more of the context of the view and the natural context of the view, rather than the very direct focus on the site of Loch Liath and the castle.
I think my first point in response to that is that LUC didn't produce any images from Loch Ness,
Fair enough.
from the waters of Loch Ness. and the images that they did produce are wirelines, which is helpful. Mr. Walker included those in his inquiry report. So I think I've gone a level above the LUC in terms of the information I've provided, because I have provided baseline images to match the proposals against. The reason why I haven't produced a panorama is because I was on a moving boat and it's not possible to set up a tripod and get panoramic images.
Only a small point anyway. In terms of visual impact and viewpoints generally, I've covered what I want to cover, so I'm not going to go into more detail. My last topic is very brief on lighting. And the reason I raise this, in the Highland Council's reason for objection, it is contended that significant adverse impacts also extending into hours of darkness at Meal-Fervenay due to the proposal's aviation lighting scheme. So I can't ignore the point because it's in the reason for objection. But taking it briefly, at paragraph 7.6 of your inquiry report, electronic page 38, let's see, you find some locally significant effects to the nighttime character of LCT 22, but not extensive enough to affect the character of the LCA as a whole. You find in 7.8 no significant effects on the SLQ of the NSA and no effects on the SLA either, I think. I can't find where you say that, but you do. 7.7, is it? Yes, same conclusion. And no claimed significant effects on viewpoints except from viewpoint 2. And for this viewpoint, as you've noted at 7.12 first bullet point, those significant effects will only be experienced by wild campers or those visiting Meal-Fervenay to watch stars. Perhaps not the biggest objection to the proposed development. I think I suggest you don't find yourself able to support that part of reason for objection 1 relating to lighting.
Well, I don't know if it's my position to support or otherwise. I mean, I've just assessed what I think the effects might be, and it's for the council to decide.
Yes, I accept that, but on the other hand, the reporters, see, you are a witness for Highland Council. Highland Council has resolved in the terms it has, and they might be interested to know whether your evidence, being the only evidence for the council, supports the contention and reason for objection 1, and my suggestion is that it does not.
Well, I do identify significant adverse lighting effects from the viewpoint.
All right. Mr. Day, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Now, in exactly 2 hours, I ask you to note.
Okay, we're just going to a short pause so we can go through our questions. I think a lot of them have been asked already and answered, so if you just bear with us for a couple of minutes and then we'll ask you a few questions.
Thank you, Mr Daly. I've just got a few questions. First of all, if I could take you to Mr Kelly's inquiry report, and that's document 14.1. Okay, in paragraph 26B, it's page 10. He states that the proposed wind farm is an outlier from the established pattern of operational and consented or not objected to wind farms. Do you consider it to be an outlier?
No, I don't. It is connected to an established and consented grouping of turbines, so it doesn't sit apart from that development.
Could I just check, do you consider that it's an extension to existing wind farms, or would it consolidate a cluster?
In terms of consented wind farms, I think the cluster is already there, so I don't really see how the proposals consolidate the cluster. I think it extends the cluster, and then it extends the effects of the cluster into, as we've been discussing, into the more sensitive landscapes of Glenafric and Loch Ness.
I'm just trying to find my way to your definitions. Or okay, so that's document 1218 of your recognition. In paragraph 411, you state you disagree with the applicant's witness regarding the influence of wind farm development on the NSA, and that the proposal creates rather than consolidates the influence of wind energy on the lower parts of the NSA. Could I just ask why you come to that, or why you disagree?
Well, I think consolidating would suggest that there is a sort of fairly substantial influence of wind energy already in the landscape, as seen from the lower parts of the NSA. But in fact, we have the very small turbines of Corrimony and a few blade tips of Crithage, which are really the main influence. And what it does, the proposals introduce a much larger and more visually prominent development, which therefore creates it creates a much larger influence of wind energy development.
Thank you. Okay, and just in terms of the your assessment of visual effects, do you consider that it is compatible with the Council's assessment?
when you say compatible with the council's assessment, I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Just in terms of how you have assessed the visual effect, and looking at table 11.72 with some of the differences, it's just, I suppose overall, do you consider your assessment as compatible with the council's assessment?
I think our conclusions on significance are compatible. I think maybe we've gone about it in slightly different ways in terms of magnitude of change. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with some of their evaluations, but in terms of their reasonings for why effects are significant, I'm generally in agreement.
Thank you. And just one final question from me. We asked questions of Mr. Walker yesterday about localised, and it was just if I could ask you, what factors have you taken into account when considering localised for landscape effects and visual effects?
I think turning to landscape effects first, there isn't really any disagreement between myself and Mr. Walker that significant effects are pretty much contained within what I can call the host landscape character type. So I would tend to agree that landscape character effects are localised. I think in terms of visual effects, I think geographical extent is a factor in terms of how far significant effects would occur. So in my view, they would extend into the region of 20 kilometres, which is a fairly considerable distance. But I think it's also important to consider the geographical importance of the affected receptors. So if there are significant effects to landscapes of national importance, such as NSAs, then I think that's a relevant consideration. I think if there are significant effects experienced by people who are visiting the landscape from around the UK and from overseas, I think that level of interest is also a consideration in my view.
Thank you. No further questions from me.
I'm just going to ask a couple of follow-up questions on the back of that. Just wondering, is there a double counting there if you're looking at the importance of the sector factors coming view? Do you not take that into account already as part of the sensitivity? So is there a double counting in that assessment?
Is this in terms of whether effects are localised? I don't think so. The effects are the effects. They're significant. The sensitivity, the fact that the landscape or the views are of interest to people from outside the area is, I think it probably affects the assessment of your evaluation of their sensitivity. It's a valued landscape that people come to visit. But I don't think it double counts the effect. It wouldn't determine whether your effect is necessarily significant or not, because you've got overseas visitors.
Would it support a conclusion of localised being wider than, say, 5-7 kilometres as a factor?
Yes, I think just trying to measure geographical extent, well, whether something is localised, I think measuring that in terms of distance is a very narrow measure. I think localized to me means is it of local interest? Is it affecting a local landscape experienced mainly by people who perhaps live there? I'm not suggesting that's not important, but I think if a proposal has a wider geographical interest, that can influence your conclusions on whether effects are localized in the NPF4 context, in my opinion.
And just on localised, Mr. Walker, I think, suggested that it would be unlikely that anything over 15 kilometres would be considered as localised. Would you agree with that?
I agree. Yes, it's quite a distance.
Turning to your methodology, I'm going to break it down in layman terms to see if I've got it right. You've got a 5-point scale, and LUC have got a 3-point scale. So, is your low lower than LUC's low?
It might be, because their low might cover a wider range. If you're talking about magnitude, it might cover a wider range of impact before you get to a medium. You might be getting to something more like what I think is a low medium, perhaps. So if you see what I mean. Just talking hypothetically, I'm not making any specific comment on Mr. Walker's assessment.
Okay, so if we're saying that your low might be lower than their low, and maybe it is just professional judgment and there's nothing you can add to this, that's absolutely fine. But I suppose I find it a bit difficult to think that your low, which might be lower, combined with a high comes to a moderate, but their low combined with a high, which might be a higher low, comes out to a minor. I do want to say just a little bit more about that, because it's a bit I probably find hardest to get my head around.
Well, my low might equal Mr. Walker's low, so it includes his low, but his low might include a slightly greater level of effect than my low, I suppose. And yeah, I think it's professional judgment at the end of the day, and the reasoning behind why you think an effect is significant. And these categorizations of magnitude and sensitivity are supposed to help in terms of justifying our conclusions, but I think GLVIA3 is fairly clear that it's the narrative behind that that's important.
Okay, Ms. Callan asked you about that compatibility of your assessment with the council assessment. Now, as I'm reading it, you don't think there's a significant effect from aviation lighting?
No, from viewpoint 2, I identified a significant effect.
And this may not be you, it might be something that Mr. Fellini's addressing closing submissions, but it's what weight we put on the council's evidence on aviation lighting being a significant impact, and your evidence that it's not a significant impact. So there's a bit of an inconsistency there.
Just to clarify, I did identify a significant effect from viewpoint 2.
But just viewpoint 2?
Yes, just viewpoint 2. Yes, sorry, yeah.
So you think you're consistent with the council's position?
Their reasons for refusal referred to lighting effects from viewpoints 2, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's consistent. I think that was the case.
Okay, we have no further questions, so Mr. Foley, would like to re-examine?
Thank you. Just coming back and picking up the last point the Porter asked you, almost, and the first point Mr. Trinick asked you, it's about, to paraphrase your last point, the Porter, it was about the narrative is perhaps more weight should be placed on the narrative, the difference in narrative between you and Mr. Walker than the precise classification.
Sorry, Mr. Foley, can you put your microphone on, please?
It was on, but perhaps it wasn't picking up. Would you want that one on?
Sorry, no, the slide is just the camera automated to the microphone. There's not the sequence next to it. We call everything you say.
Okay. You, in answer to Mr. Trinick, you referred to assessment of significance and the further guidance in the guidance notes. So my question will examine it, which is, I think, CD 1.1, CD 829. My question to you, or in re-examination, is there any particular part of CD 829 that you had in mind when, or that you would like to refer the reporters to?
So 829 is the clarifications.
Yes.
Yes. So it's referred to. It's 3.5 is the paragraph.
So I think that's on page 10, is it?
Yeah, it's actual page 8.
Yes. Electronic page 10, actual page 8. But in essence, that starts by referring you also back to GLVIA 3 itself.
That's correct.
Thank you. You were, was then some discussion about design and siting and design, and you were taken to, which is just for everyone's note, I don't think we need to go there, 8.4, CD 8.4, and you were taken to paragraphs 326 to 329 in terms of impact on skyline. Just for the reporter's benefit, is your concern about design and impact related to those particular paragraphs?
Not specific. Sorry. Not specifically those paragraphs. No.
Thank you. So I think you were taking, just check the reference, sorry. Yes, you taken to the wind energy supplementary guidance, which is CD 6.5. And oh yes. This is where Mr. Trinick challenged me to re-examine you and find a 3 sensitivity. Just so, I'm going to lead through this if I can. First of all, if you go to page 52 and 53, and to be fair, Mr. Trinick is correct, this here is the Loch Liath ridge and tops LN6, and the large-scale wind farms vary between 2 and 3, depending on where they are.
Yes, that's correct.
generally the LCT has a lower sensitivity. The LCA is rated higher in recognition of existing density of development. And then if you go to electronic page 56, and looking at landscape area, character area 9, beginning at the bottom of that page, and we have a mixture of sensitivities there. 3 and 2, so I think that just puts the detail on that. Thank you. You will then ask questions about Muir Ferveny, which is viewpoint 2, with respect to the extent to which mitigation had been undone or not, and respect to which Highland Council's position was inconsistent. In terms of the, I just want to take you to the, and those questions were put by reference to Blairy extension. If you go to the Blairy extension committee report, which is CD 1111, there are various references to mitigation, importance of mitigation in that report, which we'll cover later. But if you go to electronic page 43, specific consideration is given to Muir Ferveny, which is for that application as viewpoint 3.
So this is electronic page 43.
Electronic page 43, paragraph 875.
Of 11.
Sorry, I may have got that wrong. Is it 1113? My apologies. Sorry, it's 1160. My apologies. That the written submission is 1111.
So what was the page number again?
It's 1116. My apologies for that, and it's electronic page 43 of 95. It should be paragraph 875. And in the first paragraph of that, there is a description of Muir Ferveny and the impact. And the last sentence makes it clear that there is, consistent with your view, an undermining of mitigation. See that?
That's what it says in 8.75, yes.
And then in 877, there's further reference to mitigation, and perhaps I'd just like to explain to the reporters how that impacted on Muir Ferveny and your view on that.
So paragraph 8.77.
Yeah. It begins in order to mitigate the impact from this viewpoint, and then relates to various steps being undertaken.
Well, it identifies some measures taken which are beneficial.
And when you're considering both in the supplementary guidance and other guidance the importance of retaining mitigation, is that something that you approach by reference to only one or two viewpoints, or is that a consideration that you look at more generally?
Well, I think it's something you look at generally.
And also in respect of Muir Ferveny, you were asked about the landscape officer's consultation, which I think is CD 3.5. you were taken to the opening remarks of the full paragraph under the second bullet point, beginning, whilst the development would not significantly affect views towards Meal Ferminy. The landscape officer actually went on to say it would be extremely prominent in views from the landmark hill and would detract from its relationship to the setting described in the special quality. In terms of the extremely prominent in views from the landmark hill, do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree.
And in the quotation above, the Meal Ferminy is identified as being a good vantage point, not only to look at the Great Glen, but also within a backcloth, the Loch Liath to the south, and Balm, McCann and Afric Mountains interior to the northwest. She also says that the development would detract from its relationship to the setting described in the SQ. What's your view on that, in terms of the setting that she's described there?
Well, it detracts from the visual experience from Meal Ferminy.
I mean, I don't think there's, both you and Mr. Walker find significant impacts from Meal Ferminy.
Yes, we do.
And again, in this context, you asked about undoing mitigation in respect of cloyk. In terms of cloyk, in terms of how that is perceived, whether from Meal Ferminy or elsewhere, in the context of the Great Glen and the impact on the Great Glen, is there anything you'd like to add or explain to the reporters to how comparative cloyk is with Loch Liath? How comparable the location is?
Well, they're not very comparable. I think you see cloyk in a very separate landscape to the Great Glen. It's in the Loch Liath. It's a distinct part. Well, cloyk would form part of a discrete wind farm cluster with Strathlarrig. And it's not seen with the Great Glen in particular. It's seen beyond the Great Glen, and obviously it's not seen from the waters of Loch Ness itself or from the shoreline.
You were asked questions about the impact on Glen Affric and the Nature Scott assessment, which is in CD 3.2, beginning at electronic page 47 of 80, and you were asked particular questions by reference to electronic page, 47 of 80, and going over to electronic page 48 of 80. It would suggest to you that Nature Scott had overly concentrated on a viewpoint assessment and hadn't taken, I'm going to put words into Mr. Trinick's mouth here, but a more holistic approach to the assessment. First of all, in terms of your assessment, did you just concentrate on the impact? I think the one Mr. Trinick identified in particular was viewpoint 15.
No, it's not just viewpoint 15.
In the paragraph that Mr. Trinick drew your attention to, which is at the top of electronic page 48, says the proposal as represented by, for example, viewpoint 15, call path, etc., adverse effects are compounded, I'm just reading down, 5 lines down, by the way the viewers experience that is sequentially channelled views along the glen from 5.6 kilometres of this route, disappearing and reappearing. Do you think Mr. Trinick's criticism of the Nature Scots assessment as being partial and based on viewpoints is fair or not?
No, it's because it's not just based on viewpoints. It's clearly based on the experience of walking routes in the Glen Asset.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Daly. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you. Now I have a few questions for Mr. Kelly, but first of all, is there anything that you would wish to add to your inquiry report and statement that you mentioned you weren't going to before?
I wasn't anticipating giving any landscape and visual evidence, ma'am.
Thank you. In that case, I've just 2 questions for you in relation to your inquiry report. So again, that's document 14.1, and coming back to paragraph 26b of your inquiry report. And it's the same question that I've asked before of others. You state the proposed wind farm is an outlier from the established pattern of operational and consented or not objected to wind farms. In what way do you consider it to be an outlier?
I formed that view from the viewpoints that I assessed, but the A1 map D1, which has been supplied for the inquiry, is quite helpful because you can see the existing cluster of wind farms on an east-west axis, but Loch Liath juts out to the north, and it's on its own jutting out into the north, and that was the basis I formed my conclusion on.
Thank you. And just following on from that, in your view, would it be reasonable to view the proposal as a consolidation of an existing wind farm cluster?
No, I would not. It takes wind farms, the wind farm to the north into a more sensitive landscape, so I don't see it consolidating the cluster. I mean, the existing cluster is quite consolidated in any event.
Thank you. With no further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the time's now 12 minutes past 12. Can you just take your views on breaking now or for how long?
My vote is for a relatively short break and then start policy.
45 minutes. So start back here at 1 o'clock.
Ma'am, can I just raise one matter that, just to put down a marker? I raised something with Mr. Trinick overnight. I haven't had the chance to deal with him yet. It relates to the last session. It's just some clarification I want to give you, and it's perhaps better I have a discussion with him first before raising it further with you. It's not something I could dealt with through Mr. Daly. It relates to Highland Council's position, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with that by an agreed process.
Is that in relation to the conditions session?
No, it's to do with the session that's just been.
Oh, okay.
The enigmatic, but I'll explain it to you when I come back to it. But I just didn't want you to end this session and without me putting a marker down. I had one minor point to raise about it.
So we're happy that we addressed that minor point at the start of when we come back. Okay. So we're back here for 1 o'clock.